Welcome to Early Intervention Matters, the podcast that helps parents, teachers, and health professionals understand the diagnosis, treatment, care, and support of children with autism, ADHD, Tourette's, and other neurodevelopmental challenges. Your host, Dr. Inyang Takon, is a consultant neurodevelopment pediatrician, and she will provide insight through interviews, answering questions, and breaking down complicated topics. By sharing stories from parents and professionals in the field, we hope to make sense of what can be an overwhelming topic. Early intervention is crucial with children with developmental difficulties. Yes, early intervention matters. And now, here's your host, Dr. Inyang Takon.
Hello, everyone. You're welcome to another episode of this podcast series. Today, we are going to be focusing on parents and the journey. And my producer told me about a young lady whose son, age 3, has just had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. This young boy had speech and language delay, which parents just thought was a speech and language delay. But following the assessment, they were told he had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The lady and her partner were a bit confused because this wasn't what they were expecting. Her partner struggled to accept that this was the case. They a bit overwhelmed with all the information they've been receiving, both from professionals or from people within their circle of friends or families. And so it's left them in an emotional roller coaster. And this story is quite common. It's something I come across regularly in my day to day work as a neurodevelopmental pediatrician. And I just felt that it was important to revisit this and just go through with, on this podcast, what this journey can sometimes look like, what can help parents, and just helping them to unpick the concerns or questions that they would like to ask. So I'm Dr. Inyang Takon. I have been practicing as a neurodevelopmental pediatrician for over 20 years. But I started hosting Early Intervention Matters podcast series about almost 5 years ago. This was something I started because in my work I see parents going through different phases, and I felt that it was important to break down information and help parents understand what neurodiversity means, why people think children that present with several symptoms might be neurodiverse, and to help them navigate the process, and also to help them with understanding what kind of strategies can help, and just answer some of those questions they really want to ask or don't know how to ask. So this episode is dedicated to parents. Like I've said, I assess children with various forms of neurodevelopmental disorders, and autism is one of them. I've used the example of the young lady whose son was diagnosed with autism. And before I go on, the terminologies I feel that we need to explain a bit better. So, neurodiversity is a terminology that many of us would have been hearing in the last couple of years, and is a terminology that sometimes parents don't understand what that means, and I think it's important to explain that. So when we talk about neurodiversity or somebody being neurotypical, it all stems in the way our brains work. So the brain is a quite complex organ, but it is that organ that has it's almost like a very complex computer box that has lots of wirings, but those wirings actually program a lot of the things that we do. programs how we think, programs how we behave, and sometimes these behaviors can be a bit different from what is the usual expectation. So, when we talk about neurotypical people, we're talking about when people's behaviors and the way they process things kind of align with what we're familiar with typical development. So we know through the process of development when a child is supposed to talk, walk, what kind of behavior is suitable for different ages, what kind of behaviors do not seem right at different ages, and things. This includes the type of the way the child plays, the way the child reacts to their peers and reacts to other adults. There are things that in society we've become used to what the pattern should be. So if a parent doesn't feel that their child is speaking at a particular time, they start getting worried. If they feel that the child is speaking, but the speech is not the way it should be, it's different. Parents feel report that. And so when we talk of children or individuals who are neurodivergent, they process information in a different way from what is expected as the typical pattern of development. Their brains function differently. We're not saying that their brains function incorrectly. It's not incorrect. It's just functioning in a different way compared to the usual patterns of what we expect with normal development. And that's just understanding it in broad terms. So it's a different way in which the developing child's brain, who that child then becomes an adult, processes information is the way they speak. That's a bit different from what people usually expect in normal development. The way they relate to people, that is different from the way people relate to people in normal development. The way they think and see the world around them. And we don't, like I said again, it's not it's not incorrect. It's not wrong. It's not something that's abnormal. It's just a different way in which the child is seeing the world. And that's why we refer to it as differences. So if we think back then and looking at neurodivergent children, are children whose brains are just working in a different way, then we see our roles as parents is understanding how that child's brain is working so that we can communicate with them and we can relate to them and we can help other people understand them, because we are not aiming to correct their brain, we're not aiming to cure them, we're just trying to understand how their brain processes information and helping other people at home, at school, to understand how they process information. So we can see why, when people out there don't understand the process of neurodiversity, people can see people whose brains work differently as being something wrong with them. And sometimes people can incorrectly think that they just need to cure them, which is wrong. And so that's why I felt that it's important to stress that point. Now, when we look at the different behavioral patterns of neurodiversity, we see that it spreads across different spectrum and different patterns. So there are patterns that have been recognized that fit different categories. So, for example, there are patterns where the brain works in a different way, where the child is hyperactive, inattentive, or sometimes impulsive, doing things without thinking about it. And when we recognize that pattern, we call that kind of pattern ADHD. In another situation, the pattern might be such that the child may or may not have speech and language delay. The child might be in their own world. The child may not readily talk to people or be comfortable with communicating with people the way other children would do. Or the child may have their preferences of things that they like doing, That pattern is seen in conditions like autism spectrum disorder. So there are other forms of neurodiversity, but I've just mentioned two. And so when especially for families where they have more than one, where I have two or more children, sometimes parents are used to the typical pattern of development. So when you see or have another child whose development is quite different from the other children that you've had, parents get concerned, they get worried. If you've got a child who behaves differently when you're outdoors and struggles to be in your usual functioning, if you go to gatherings and the child is uncomfortable or anxious, parents get worried. And so these differences usually result in parents seeking an assessment. So I know I'm talking to parents at different parts of the journey. So you might be a parent, just like the parent I spoke about, who had been on a journey that resulted in the diagnosis being given, or you're at the stage where you're noticing some things, but you just feel, you know, that there's nothing to do, there's nothing, you know, that it's just normal, or people have told you no need to go and see any health professional, or you've gone on the internet, as many of us do, and you're a bit overwhelmed with all the information that you're getting. The key point is, at whatever stage of the journey that you are at, is that if you have at the back of your mind that what you want to do is understand your child better, understand how their brain processes things, so that you can put in the necessary support for them that will then make them find it easier to adjust into the day to day life that they have to encounter, being outdoors, being at school, going on transport, being in the shops. Because without those adjustments being in place, then they're going to struggle to fit in into what has been designed for people whose brains function in the expected typical way. So if I bring this down to the fact that, for example, if you're somebody that has impaired vision, such as I do, and I need my glasses to function, there's no way I'll be able to get into my car and drive if I don't have my glasses. Because what will happen? I will crash the car. I'll probably fall in front of my house before I get into my car. I will crash the car. If I get into the shops without my glasses, I won't even be able to see the details of what I need. I will pick up the wrong things. And therefore, for me to be able to function and be happy going into the different settings, I do need my glasses. I do need that to be able to be like everybody else who is walking around not using glasses. I do need my glasses. And so that's just a nutshell of what it looks like for children who are neurodiverse. They need certain adjustments to be able to function in that world where children who are neurotypical are functioning. But the only way that you can get them into that space is for people to recognize and assess what the differences are. So, for example, if I didn't go to the optician and get my eyes tested and them to give me the right prescription, then I wouldn't know how impaired I was. I can't just go to the store and pick up any glasses. I need the right pair of glasses through testing, through assessment, through the right prescription. That is how it is for neurodiverse children. So, the early intervention podcast, we have been very fortunate to have parents, to have guests, special guests who have appeared on our podcast series, who have brought us a lot of rich information available for parents. And it is quite important that we direct you to the right source and the right place to get information. So, for example, if your child has a speech and language delay, and you pick that up from the beginning and you're thinking, what is normal? What is expected? What should I be doing? How can I help this child speak better? How can I communicate with my child better? Then I would really recommend that you listen to the podcast that we interviewed a very highly specialist and experienced speech and language therapist, Mayuri Davis. It's on the Early Intervention podcast series. And it was a great session. Mayuri went into the basics of the expectations of speech and language development. She helped parents understand how to improve their child's speech and language. She gave lots of pragmatic advice and she gave examples of resources. We would really implore you to please listen to that podcast series because it helps you distinguish between, does your child just have a speech and language delay, or does your child have a speech pattern, a communication pattern that is more in keeping with autism spectrum disorder. The child can have both. They can have speech and language delay and they can have autism spectrum disorder. But that was a very, very useful podcast. And then when we think about when we get a diagnosis for a child, sometimes as parents, it is natural to worry that what's going to be the outcome for your child, what's it going to be like for them and their development, are they going to be able to function, are they going to be able to do things independently. And sometimes we get a lot of sometimes denial about, no, it's not my child, that's not really happening. You don't even want to hear of there's some of us and parents where people don't want to actually hear that their child is neurodiverse because society sometimes has made it in such a way that people feel quite, they don't feel at ease talking about their child's neurodiversity. Sometimes society has made it in such a way that the way they look at children and their families with neurodiverse makes families just retreat and not want to, be in open spaces with others because the people have had very negative experiences. I just want to reassure you that almost every child has strengths, has unique attributes where if you don't understand the child, if you don't nurture the child, if you don't give them the space to actually flourish in those attributes, it can be a very difficult time. And so there are positive stories about young people who have gone through that journey, experienced bullying, experienced all kinds of negative experiences at school and how that made them feel, but have come through it successfully. So I would again want to signpost you to listen to Jesse's story. Jesse is a young man with ADHD whom I've known for several years. And it was such an amazing interview with Jesse talking about his story and talking about how his diagnosis of ADHD became one of his great strengths and how he's successful in what he's doing. It was an amazing interview. Jesse gave us a lot of practical tips, which I would advise all parents to listen to. And as parents, we've talked about the fact that we go through lots of challenges as parents. If you're thinking about what you have to navigate as a parent of a child with neurodiversity, is it when you're taking your child out to school? Is it the how other parents or other people in the public do not understand the behaviors your child has? Is it when your child has sensory overload and is reacting in a way that is expressing their discomfort, but that is misinterpreted by people in the public? Have been known and observed how sometimes people in the public can be quite negative towards children who might be very overwhelmed in sensory spaces. And as such, they make the parents of the children feel so uncomfortable that parents just find it difficult to do their regular day-to-day life. Now, we know that when you receive a diagnosis of neurodiversity, that your child, when you receive that diagnosis of neurodiversity, that your child can, your life changes. your life will change because obviously you now have a young person, a young child that you would have to be doing more for because they need your help to navigate the world. So your independence, where you could go away and do so many things independently, may change. And it's adapting to that change can be difficult. Your priorities will change. You will need to just think through again what's important, what takes your top priority. Sometimes parents have had to change their work pattern. I've known parents who have put a hold on their work because of the challenges that that brings. So we do kind of implore parents to have an open mind about what a diagnosis of neurodiversity brings. And in the podcast series, we were very fortunate to have two amazing parents. And I would really recommend that if you're a parent on this journey, please listen to the interviews. So, an interview with Isabella talked about her journey as a parent navigating the diagnosis of neurodiversity in her children. And she talks about the highs and the lows and the challenges and trying to navigate everything from school to outside school. It is a very informative podcast series, and I would really advise that parents should listen to this because Izekbua gives real life practical experiences of what it means to be a parent of a neurodiverse child, and it's quite honest, it's quite open, and she talks about, one key thing that she stressed there is loving your child, accepting your child, and not putting rigid timelines on when you expect them to achieve certain milestones. As a parent, you are your child's greatest champion, your child's greatest advocate, because we're now in a situation where I know globally sometimes it's quite difficult to get a diagnosis, or the resources that should be available for your child after a diagnosis is very minimal or not available. And so you become that number one advocate for your child. And our interview with Folu, a mother of a young man with neurodiversity, was another impressive interview. I would really advise that you listen to that. Folu talked about the onset, talked about how she fought for her child from the beginning, how she advocated through different spheres, and including her child being able to attend a school that there wasn't any hope of her child getting that placement. I must say, listening to Folu and interviewing Folu as a guest was one of the most inspirational chats I've ever had with a parent of a child with neurodiversity. I learned a lot as a clinician, and the information that Folu shared was so useful, and it's something that I feel would be very useful for parents, particularly if you're at the beginning of this journey, just seeing what lies out there for parents of children with neurodiversity. But Folu brought a lot of hope. Through Folu's child being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, Folu became an advocate for others as well. She acquired a lot of skills and she was able to be a support person for others. She also expanded the things that she was doing. She found new skills that she never knew she had. And she also advanced in her career as well. So I think, just to reassure parents that you are not alone, not all hope is not lost. It's just about reframing your mind, and reframing how you see, this new phase of your life and how you navigate that through with your young person, with family members, and how you can be of a great support to your young person. So I would really implore that, parents go and listen to that in those interviews by Isegboa and by Folu because they are very informative interviews. And so, as parents, I just want to reassure you that we understand that this is a new phase that you have to embrace, but which comes with a lot of challenge because not everybody you come across will understand what you're going through. Not everybody you come across will know what you're going through. So it's a new phase that you are going to have to navigate. But there are resources, there are people out there who have been through this journey, and you can also learn from what they've been through. And I just want to address families here where sometimes how do you work when with other family members? And might be your partner, it might be other family members um, who do not understand what or where there's disagreement with whether your the young person's outcome. I think again, just listening to those series would help you, particularly Folu's podcast highlights the different position that she and her husband both had when the diagnosis was first received and how they navigated through that process. Saying all this, there is great joy and fulfillment in being a parent of a neurodiverse child. Children who are neurodiverse teach you a lot of things about life. We're so sometimes accustomed to the rigid approach of this is what they say, this is what we expect. But neurodiverse children bring a different perspective to life. They have they have gifts, they have ways in which they see the world, which we never saw the world that way. They enrich our lives. They are, they bring so much joy in the things they do that we can miss that moment if we're focusing on the fact that we feel they're different and they need a lot of support. We want our parents to have an open mind to, like we said, love your child and appreciate them. And in doing so, you begin to see those things that bring you great joy with your child. I, as a pediatrician, I love the children I see with neurodiversity because it's sometimes the way they phrase things. It's something they've said that I would never have thought about in a million years. It's the way that they have, they've spoken openly about things that just challenges me as a pediatrician, despite my years of experience. I continue to learn from them. Many of them are so gifted and talented. I once was amazed how a young lady I saw once in the clinic who had had difficulties being at school, attending school. She was neurodiverse, she had a lot of anxiety, and she just struggled with being at school. But I was amazed when she brought out the drawings that she does in her room and shown them to me. I was absolutely blown away. And do you know what? This young lady had put out those drawings out there once, and she was scouted by some major um, successful organizations who happened to see her drawings somewhere, and they were absolutely amazed and reached out to her to get her to do some work for them, which she was paid for. Now, that is somebody who has so much talent. Yes, she struggles to be in the usual environment for learning, but that didn't mean that she didn't have those exceptional gifts. And somebody out there, not within the region that she was in, recognized that talent. And she then felt fulfilled that somebody was recognizing things that she was doing, and she became even more keen to do those things. That's neurodiversity. And if we do not nurture, we do not provide that platform, we do not work with our children and understand them, we would not discover those gifts. So I just want to reassure us that spending time with our neurodiverse child to actually understand their gifts, what they do, what they like, and just discovering those talents within them is very rewarding. I just again want to, you know, as I've been talking, I know there are parents probably who people have probably suggested their child might be neurodiverse and they have said no, or they could be other family members or friends who have said to them, no, we don't think your child is neurodiverse. I would just want to reassure parents that it is better to have your child, have an assessment and for the professionals to be able to let you know whether your child is neurodiverse or not so that you can get them the support they need. Not knowing or that child not having the assessment they need then delays that process and that child suffers in silence. Your child then goes through the different stages of life, different stages of education, struggling even more to face the world, and that can sometimes lead to other negative consequences like anxiety, sometimes depression, and just the child's world shrinks even further. So I just want to, reassure you, just like we've said when we started off, that being neurodiverse is not something that's wrong or incorrect. It's just understanding the way your brain processes information. We know that sometimes there are cultural influences. We've all come from different cultures, and there might be people that might feel, oh no, that doesn't happen, or some cultures are more, resistant to accepting neurodiversity. And we get that. We understand it's not something that we've been used to. And sometimes we get all kinds of anxieties around our child having a diagnostic label. But we know that neurodiversity is not something that just started today. We know that when we think back, having had an understanding of neurodiversity, we would see people, we would recognize people within our families who had these traits that we're talking about today, and who we can see how lack of recognition of those traits probably influenced their outcome for their lives. So I can recognize that in my wider family. When I speak to people recognize that one person, two people in their families have had similar behavioral patterns and not had the assessments and input, and it's influenced the way their lives have turned out. So I just want to encourage us that neurodiversity is not a new terminology. People have rephrased the names, but the concept has always been there. We have a better understanding of why these things happen, and we have a better understanding that it's not that there's something wrong with the person or the child, but it's actually knowing how to support the child and how we as parents can navigate that process successfully. So I do hope that just giving the summary of some of the podcast sessions we've had and just helping parents navigating this journey of neurodiversity, whatever levels that we're in, whether we're at the beginning or about to start the process or not wanting to start the process. I hope that explaining neurodiversity has helped us to feel more comfortable in beginning to understand our child better. So please do go to the podcast series on www.drtakon.com and listen to the podcasts there, particularly the ones I've highlighted, as they would be very useful in your journey navigating this process of neurodiversity. So I do wish you all the best. And like I said, to find us, visit www.drtakon.com and also visit www.school-doctor.com. So School Doctor is one of the organizations that I co-founded with colleagues, but has a lot of information on neurodiversity and how to get a lot of information that is useful. So you can also visit that site. Thank you for listening in today. I really appreciate you listening in and wishing you all the very best, and looking forward to communicating with you again on our next podcast series. Thank you. As we always say, early intervention leads to better outcome, and early intervention can only be achieved by early diagnosis. So thank you for listening into the series today. I know some of the things we've talked about today would probably have generated some questions or need to seek clarification. So I'm happy to take questions, and I'll invite you to send your questions to eim@drtakon.com. Thank you for listening in.